They say patience is a virtue, but at 72, I'd learned it's also a weapon. The letter from Richard's office arrived exactly when I expected it to. Thick cream paper that felt like justice between my fingers. 6 months of careful planning. 6 months of watching my daughter Rebecca think she'd outsmarted the old man. 6 months since she looked me in the eye and called me stupid while trying to steal everything I'd worked for. They say patience is a virtue, but at 72, I'd learned it's also a weapon. The letter from Richard's office arrived exactly when I expected it to. Thick cream paper that felt like justice between my fingers. 6 months of careful planning. 6 months of watching my daughter Rebecca think she'd outsmarted the old man. 6 months since she looked me in the eye and called me stupid while trying to steal everything I'd worked for. I set the envelope on my kitchen table next to my morning coffee and smiled. Inside was a single sentence that made my heart race with anticipation. Phase 2 is ready to proceed. Call when prepared to move forward. My hands didn't shake as I reached for the phone. Rebecca was about to discover that underestimating your father can be a very expensive mistake. The trap had been set, the bait taken, and now it was time to spring it. What she'd done to me was unforgivable. What I was about to do to her would be unforgettable. Some betrayals cut deep enough to change everything. Mine started 8 months ago in what I thought was a moment of family bonding. I'm Frank, living alone since my wife Martha passed 3 years back in our house in Millbrook Valley. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, modest, but paid off after 30 years of mortgage payments. Martha's death left an emptiness that no amount of space could fill, but it was still home. Rebecca is my eldest, 45 years old, works downtown in some marketing job that pays her enough to live beyond her means. Divorced twice, no children, always complaining about money despite making more than I ever did. My son Paul lives across the country in Silver Creek with his wife and kids. Good man, calls weekly, visits when he can. Rebecca was different. After the funeral, she started visiting more frequently. Initially, I was grateful for the company, thinking my daughter was finally showing some concern for her aging father. The conversation seemed innocent enough at first. How was I feeling? Was the house too much work? Had I thought about what would happen if I got sick? Then the questions became more pointed, more calculated, more dangerous. I should have seen it coming, but grief makes you vulnerable to hope. The warning signs were subtle at first, like cracks in a foundation you don't notice until the house starts settling. Last spring, I'd been experiencing some chest discomfort. Nothing serious, but serious enough that Dr. Mitchell wanted me to undergo a stress test. When Rebecca offered to drive me to the appointment, I thought it was thoughtful. I was wrong. Sitting in that sterile waiting room, she pulled out a manila folder filled with documents I'd never seen before. Dad, I've been thinking about your situation. If something happened to you during this test, or any time really, are your affairs properly organized? Do you have updated power of attorney documents? The way she said it, clinical and prepared, made something cold settle in my stomach. I told her everything was handled through Richard's office, that we'd taken care of all that years ago when Martha got sick. But Rebecca pressed for details. Who exactly had power of attorney? What were the specific terms? When was it last updated? You know how families can fight over these things when emotions are high, she continued, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I was beginning to recognize. It might be wise to review everything, make sure it's ironclad. I assured her everything was in order, but she wouldn't let it go. She had suggestions about updating everything, making changes that would protect me better. The conversation felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it. That night, lying in bed, I realized my daughter wasn't concerned about my welfare. She was conducting reconnaissance. Richard has been my attorney for nearly 2 decades, a sharp man in his early 60s who specializes in estate planning and elder law. When I called him the morning after the medical appointment and described Rebecca's sudden interest in my legal affairs, his silence stretched long enough to make me uncomfortable. Frank, he finally said, I see this pattern more often than any attorney should. Adult children who suddenly become very interested in their parents' financial arrangements. Sometimes it's genuine concern. Sometimes it's something else entirely. I asked him what he recommended, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. We need to document everything. Update your will with very specific language about what happens if someone tries to manipulate or coerce you. We should also get a comprehensive cognitive evaluation done, establishing your mental competency beyond any doubt. And Frank, we might want to test the waters a bit, see exactly what Rebecca's intentions are. Over the following months, we put safeguards in place. The cognitive assessment came back perfect, as I knew it would. We crafted an ironclad will with provisions that would make any contest costly and futile. But Richard's most clever suggestion was what he called the inheritance test. Tell Rebecca you're considering giving her early access to part of her inheritance. Watch how she reacts, what she asks for, how quickly the conversation escalates. I agreed to set the trap, though part of me hoped my daughter would prove my suspicions wrong. She didn't. Greed reveals itself in small increments, then all at once. I called Rebecca on a Saturday morning in late summer, mentioning that I'd been reflecting on our previous conversation about getting my affairs in order. Would she like to come over for dinner to discuss it? Her response was immediate and enthusiastic, which should have been my first clue. She arrived at my house within 2 hours, practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad, I'm so pleased you're taking a proactive approach to this," she said, settling into Martha's old chair in the living room. "It really shows you're thinking clearly about the future." I explained that I'd been considering giving both her and Paul early access to part of their inheritance, maybe $50,000 each, while I was still around to see them benefit from it. The way her eyes lit up was almost predatory. "That's incredibly generous, Dad. When were you thinking of doing this?" "Soon," I replied. "I'd need to liquidate some investments, but Richard could handle the paperwork." "What about Paul? Have you discussed this with him yet?" "Not yet. I wanted to get your thoughts first." Rebecca leaned forward, and I could practically see the calculations happening behind her eyes. "Dad, can I be completely honest with you? Paul's doing well for himself across the country. He's got his job, his house, his family supporting him. I'm the one here locally, the one who will be available when you need help as you get older. Maybe it would make sense to adjust the amounts to reflect that reality." There it was. The first crack in her facade, the beginning of the end of any illusions I might have harbored about my daughter's motives. But I wasn't done testing her yet. Over the following weeks, Rebecca's visits became more frequent and her questions more invasive. She'd arrive with takeout dinner and conversation that inevitably steered toward my finances. How much was the house worth in the current market? What about my investment portfolio? Had I considered that Paul, being so far away, might not need as much financial support? I mean, Dad, realistically, I'm going to be the one here when you need daily assistance. That has to count for something substantial, right? She was building her case methodically, positioning herself as the devoted local daughter while systematically undermining Paul's claim to equal treatment. It was manipulation disguised as concern, and I let her continue because I needed to understand exactly how far she was willing to go. The answer came on a Tuesday afternoon in September when I was napping in my recliner after lunch. I woke to the sound of papers rustling in my den. Rebecca had let herself in with the spare key I'd given her for emergencies and was sitting at my desk, rifling through my private documents, bank statements, investment summaries, insurance policies, tax returns. She had everything spread across the desk like she was conducting an audit. "What are you doing, Rebecca?" She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Dad, your filing system is completely chaotic. I was trying to organize things so we can get a clear picture of your financial situation. You really need professional help managing all this." I stood there watching my own daughter inventory my assets like she was planning an estate sale. "Those papers are private, Rebecca." She finally looked up, and her expression was cold, calculating. "Dad, you're 72 years old. You're not thinking clearly about financial management anymore. Someone needs to take control of this situation before you make serious mistakes." That's when I knew she wasn't just interested in early access to her inheritance. She wanted all of it. The breaking point came exactly 1 week later, orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. Rebecca arrived unannounced with a folder of documents and 2 men in expensive suits. She introduced the younger one as Marcus, her financial advisor, and the older one as someone who could help me optimize my estate planning. "Dad, we need to have a serious conversation about your financial future," she announced, spreading papers across my dining room table without invitation. "I've been analyzing your situation, and frankly, you're hemorrhaging money through poor planning and outdated strategies." I asked her to explain what she meant. "You're paying excessive taxes because your investments aren't properly structured. This house is a money pit with maintenance and utilities eating up your income. Your current will is outdated and inefficient. You need immediate professional intervention." Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out more documents. Power of attorney forms, investment transfer paperwork, a real estate listing agreement for my house that had somehow already been partially completed. "Mr. Frank," he said smoothly, "your daughter is absolutely right to be concerned. We can restructure everything, maximize your returns, and ensure your care needs are properly funded for the long term." I looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "You want me to sign over control of my finances to you? I want you to let me protect you, Dad. You're not stupid, but you're old, and old people make costly financial mistakes. There was that word, stupid. The way she said it, dismissive and condescending, like she was talking to a confused child instead of the man who'd raised her and paid for her education. I stood up slowly, walked to my front door, and opened it wide. "Get out. Dad, you're making a... All of you, get out of my house, now!" Rebecca's carefully maintained mask fell away completely, revealing something ugly underneath. "You're making a huge mistake, Dad, a catastrophic one. You can't handle this alone anymore, and you're too stupid and stubborn to admit it." There it was again. Stupid. "I'm not signing anything today. I need time to consider all this." "Fine," she snapped, her voice losing all pretense of concern. "But don't take too long. You're not getting any younger, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you destroy everything Mom and you worked for just because you're too proud and confused to accept help." After they left, I called Richard immediately. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. I told him everything that had happened, every detail of the ambush. "Frank, this is escalating much faster than I anticipated. We need to accelerate our timeline and find out exactly what Rebecca's planning." "What do you mean?" "I mean it's time to discover just how far your daughter is willing to go." Richard had connections throughout the legal community, including a private investigator named Sarah who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. Former police detective, sharp as a razor, and completely discreet. Within 1 week, she'd uncovered information that made my blood run cold. Rebecca had been researching guardianship procedures for incapacitated elderly parents. She'd consulted with multiple attorneys about contesting wills and challenging competency determinations. Most damaging of all, she'd opened a business bank account under the name Frank Estate Management, with herself as the sole authorized signatory. She wasn't just planning to steal my inheritance, she was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could control everything legally. The final test came on a Monday morning in October, delivered with theatrical precision. Rebecca arrived with Marcus and a third man she introduced as Dr. William, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in cognitive assessments for elderly patients. "Dad, we've arranged for Dr. William to conduct a brief evaluation just to establish a baseline for your mental function going forward. It's completely routine." I invited them in, offered coffee, and began the performance of my life. I acted confused about dates, gave rambling answers to simple questions, and pretended to lose my train of thought mid-sentence. I let them think they were witnessing cognitive decline. Dr. William asked me about current events, basic arithmetic, and recent memories. I responded with calculated confusion, mixing up dates and giving vague, uncertain answers. Rebecca exchanged meaningful looks with Marcus throughout the session. "Mr. Frank," Dr. William said gently, "your daughter has expressed some legitimate concerns about your ability to manage complex financial decisions. Based on what I'm observing today, I would recommend a comprehensive neurological evaluation." "What kind of evaluation?" I asked, letting my voice waver slightly. Rebecca jumped in immediately. "Dad, it's nothing frightening. Just some tests to make sure you're properly protected. If something were to happen to your mental capacity, legally speaking, we need to ensure someone responsible is designated to handle your affairs." I nodded slowly, as if processing this information with great difficulty. "I suppose that makes sense." "Excellent. I'll schedule the formal assessment for next week," Dr. Williams said. After they left, I called Richard immediately. "Phase 1 is complete. They took the bait completely." "Perfect. Are you ready for Phase 2, Frank? Because once we start this, there's no going back." I looked around my house, at the photos of Martha and me on our wedding day, at the life we'd built together over 4 decades. Rebecca thought she could steal it all by convincing the world I was a senile old fool who needed a guardian. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready to end this." The envelope in my hands represents 6 months of meticulous planning and legal maneuvering. Rebecca has no idea what's about to hit her, but in approximately 4 hours, her world will collapse. At precisely 2:30 this afternoon, a courier will deliver a registered package to Rebecca's office downtown. Inside will be copies of the real cognitive assessment I took last month, the one showing perfect mental capacity and no signs of impairment, documentation of her unauthorized access to my financial records, photographs of her going through my private papers, Sarah's comprehensive investigative report detailing the fraudulent bank account and her research into guardianship proceedings. But that's just the appetizer. The main course will be the updated will, filed this morning and completely legal. Rebecca's inheritance has, been reduced to exactly $1 with a detailed explanation that anyone who calls their parent stupid while attempting to defraud them has forfeited any right to benefit from that parent's lifetime of work. Paul gets everything: the house, the investments, the savings accounts, the insurance policies. All of it. The dessert will be the restraining order, served simultaneously, preventing Rebecca from coming within 500 feet of my property or contacting me directly for any reason. But the real masterpiece, the pièce de résistance, will be the final document in the package, a detailed complaint I'm filing with state authorities about attempted elder fraud and financial abuse. Rebecca's little estate management business is about to receive very unwelcome attention from law enforcement. I finish my coffee and walk to the window. Mrs. Patterson across the street is working in her garden, trimming roses that have bloomed late into the season. It's a perfect autumn morning in Millbrook Valley, quiet and peaceful. By sunset, my daughter will understand that calling someone stupid doesn't make them stupid. It just makes you careless enough to underestimate them. The phone rings. Richard's office. "Mr. Frank? The courier is en route. Estimated delivery is 2:30 p.m. I check the clock on the mantel, the one Martha and I received as a wedding gift. Perfect timing. Rebecca will be at work when the package arrives, surrounded by colleagues when she opens it and discovers what 6 months of planning looks like when it's executed with precision. Sometimes revenge is a dish best served cold. Today, it's being served ice cold with legal documentation and a side of justice. And I find myself genuinely curious to see how my daughter explains this to her financial advisor friends.